This is an AQA Psychology A-level revision video for Paper 2 approaches with a specific focus on the biological approach. So let's have a look at where the biological approach fits in the bigger picture on the specification. So the biological approach is one of the named approaches that you have to be able to describe, apply and evaluate. It's made up of lots of different sections. So you have to understand the influence of genes on behaviour, biological structures on behaviour, and neurochemistry on behaviour. So the influence of those three things on human behaviour. You also have to know about genotypes and phenotypes and the genetic basis of behaviour. So those two are kind of linked. The genetic basis of behaviour is the genotype and the phenotype. And then you also have to know about evolution and behaviour. So you might already be familiar with evolution, but it's just linking it to psychology a bit specifically. So getting started on the main assumptions of the biological approach, one that I would always encourage you to learn, will help you to understand everything that we're going to go through in this video, is that their main assumption is everything psychological is at first biological. This idea that anything psychological, schizophrenia, depression, intelligence, personality, is at first biological, whether that's genetics, the brain, hormones, whatever it is that's psychological is rooted in biology. So biological approach psychologists are interested in how biological structures such as the brain or hormones or genes and processes within the body impact on behaviour. So genes affect behaviour and influence individual psychological differences. These are their main assumptions, along with that the brain, nervous system and other biological systems should be studied. So in the biopsychology unit, which you will cover, that includes topics of the nervous system, the endocrine system, and two sections on the brain in terms of localization and lateralization. So the biological approach really gives you a good basic understanding of things that you will cover in more detail later on in the course. And finally, their main assumption of this idea of the mind does not exist. So the cognitive approach believes in the mind, that black box, that thing that is not physical but allows us to think. Biological psychologists believe that the mind lives in the brain because they centre around the idea that it's the brain that controls our behaviour and that the mind is too abstract. So the brain is a physical thing and the mind lives in the brain is the main assumption from the biological approach. The research methods used and favoured in the biological approach draw on concepts from hard sciences. So brain scanning methods, as you can see in the image on the left. And the most common methods they use outside of brain scanning is lab experiments and observations. So again, you'll learn more about brain scanning techniques in the biopsychology unit later on in the course. So we're now going to get started on one of the first components of the specification, which is the genetic basis of behaviour. So psychologists from the biological approach are interested in trying to determine and provide evidence for the extent to which behaviours or characteristics such as intelligence, personality or mental illnesses are the result of inheritance of genes, of nature, or whether they are due to environmental influences, nurture. And they're trying to do that because they are interested in whether it is the same as the way physical characteristics such as eye colour and height are inherited. So that's where we move on to twin studies now. Twin studies are about the genetic basis of behaviour. They allow us to determine the genetic basis of behaviour. And they are the method used to investigate whether psychological characteristics have that genetic basis. Now, the reason why twin studies are used is something you can have a think about if you just pause the video, but in 5 seconds' time, I will talk you through why it is that twin studies are favoured in psychology to discover the genetic basis of behaviour. So here's just an image to demonstrate the two types of twins. So you've got monozygotic, and that breaks down into the words one, mono, and zygotic, zygote, one egg essentially. So the twins are formed when a fertilized cell splits into two. So they form two separate embryos, but they're from the one, which is why they share 100% of their genetic material. Whereas dizygotic twins, you might have heard of them as fraternal twins instead of identical twins. but you can just call them non-identical twins. However, I do recommend you get to grips with the terminology of monozygotic and dizygotic twins, because that's just specialist terminology. Now, they are from two zygotes, so they're formed when two separate eggs become fertilized by different sperm cells, which is why they only share 50% of their DNA. They're essentially just brothers and sisters that are born at the same time and share a womb together, whereas your monozygotic twins are that, splits into two and share that same genetic material. So the way twin studies work and the way they are used to investigate the genetic basis of behaviour is through calculating concordance rates. So a concordance rate is a percentage which is calculated, and it is used to determine the extent to which twins share the same characteristics. So when we say twins here, we are talking about comparing monozygotic twins with 100% of the same DNA to dizygotic twins with only 50% of the same DNA. So you would expect concordance rates to reveal, if something is biological, they would reveal higher concordance rates amongst identical monozygotic twins compared to dizygotic twins, because that would provide evidence for a genetic basis. If both identical twins experience depression or OCD in this example, then that would suggest there is a genetic element, compared to if only one of the dizygotic twins had it. That would suggest there's less of a role of genetics because they only have 50% of their genes. So this research you might have come across in the psychopathology part of the course. Research has found that 68% of identical twins both suffer from OCD, compared to only 31% of non-identical twins. So here in identical twins, 68% is a lot higher of a percentage compared to 31%. So the difference in those two figures would confirm that there is a genetic basis, because the difference is the percentage of DNA that they share, with monozygotics sharing 100% of their DNA and dizygotics sharing only 50%. So there should be 100% concordance rates. If something is genetic and only genetic, you would expect that identical twins have 100% concordance rate, which means that for 50 MZ twins, if one of them has OCD, you would expect the other to have OCD, and for that to occur 50 times over. However, as you see, 68% is not quite 100%, but the fact that it is higher than 31% is what confirms there is a genetic basis. Moving on to genotype and phenotype next. So your genotype is the genetic makeup of a person, your genes. Your type of genes, if you like. Genotype, your genetic makeup. Phenotype is the way in which your genes are expressed in the environment. So this little equation here, genotype plus the environment equals phenotype. And so we go back to this example of identical twins. Identical twins have the same genotype, they have the same genes, but their phenotype differs because their environment can change, especially as they get older and into adulthood. So my cousins are identical twins, for example, and for most of their life they did look identical and they acted identical. They had the same sort of dry sense of humour, and their mannerisms, everything was exactly the same, until unfortunately one of them had quite a severe illness that affected him eating, affected his airways, etc., and he couldn't eat for months, which meant that he lost a severe amount of weight, and he's now has to have a very restricted diet, and he's not able to exercise a lot because of the way the illness has affected him, which means that he is very slim compared to his identical twin, who is not as slim. So that is a clear example of how your phenotype as in an identical twin can differ from the genotype. Although they are identical with the exact same genes, their phenotype, their genes, are expressed very differently in the environment as a result of their environment. And another example here is PKU, which is a rare genetic disorder. So it's passed on through genetics, through the genotype. And PKU can cause severe learning difficulties in those who have that genotype. But the element here, the phenotype element, is that the child can be placed on a particular diet and that can allow them to develop normally without any complications. So that demonstrates the relationship between genotype and phenotype, because although they've got the genotype of PKU, through the environment they can prevent PKU being expressed as the phenotype. So it illustrates much of human behaviour does depend on the interaction between nature, which is your inherited factors, but also nurture, the environment. So genotype and phenotype can be argued to support this idea of interactionism, okay, which is a key theory now in psychology, moving away from this idea that behaviour is only biological or only environmental. Genotype and phenotype can be used to articulate that actually the two combine and interact with one another. So moving back towards that nature element now for the biological approach, the next thing on the specification you need to know about is the influence of biological structures and neurochemistry on behaviour. So we start by breaking down the words. Neurochemistry, neuro means brain, and chemistry is about the chemicals in the brain. So neurochemistry is all about the action of chemicals in the brain, of which we have many. So most of our behaviour and our thoughts relies on synaptic transmission, chemical transmission in the brain, which occurs through the use of neurotransmitters. Evidence has found that an imbalance of particular neurotransmitters is linked to specific mental illness. For example, serotonin in the brain is linked to OCD, and then having too much dopamine, and too little actually, but overproduction of dopamine has been linked to schizophrenia, which is a form of psychosis where a person hears voices or has hallucinations. So there might be visual hallucinations, auditory hallucinations, etc. But that's been linked to dopamine, which is a chemical in the brain. Moving on then to biological structures and the examples that you can use here. So biological structures, particularly just the organisation of the brain and the functions of each part of the brain. So a really good example, or two good examples to use that you will revisit in the biopsychology unit, are Broca's area, which was discovered by Paul Broca. He was the person that identified this specific part of the brain and named it after himself. The way he did it was through postmortems of individuals who had lost the ability to speak. And what he found was that the damage in the brain of those individuals was located in the same place, specifically the left frontal lobe of the brain. So that's the left-hand side of your brain, right at the front by your forehead. Broca's area is now the name that is used for the part of our brain which is responsible for speech production. So that shows you the influence of biological structures on behaviour. That particular biological structure, the left frontal lobe, is responsible for the behaviour of speaking. And then Phineas Gage, which is this gentleman here in this image, he was a railway worker which had this famous iron rod which he's holding. It went through his skull and damaged again his frontal lobe, but a different region to where Broca's area is. He survived that horrific accident, but his personality changed. So he didn't die and nothing else changed in him except for his personality. And his friends and colleagues described him as no longer Phineas because he became a lot more aggressive. But everything else in him was fine. So again, that shows the influence of biological structures, the brain structure, on behaviour, in this case personality or aggression. Moving on to the final part of the biological approach, which is evolution and behaviour. So this links to Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection. So you might already be familiar with this, and all this is about really is just linking it to specific psychological findings or psychological behaviours. So Darwin's theory was that any genetically determined behaviour that enhances human survival or species survival and reproduction will get continued into future generations. It gets naturally selected, it gets bred again and again because it's advantageous. So traits that provide an advantage are those which are naturally selected. In a psychological sense, in humans, this could be something such as attachment, aggression, or intelligence. Aggression is something that's naturally selected because to be aggressive, it allows you to survive. It might allow, especially primates, to get to the top of the hierarchy. intelligence is crucial in humans to navigate the world, basically, and get by, or to get a job, etc. So those are all desirable traits. But the one in particular that I have made in purple and I'm underlining is attachment, because Bowlby's theory of monotropy, Bowlby's evolutionary theory of attachment, is this idea that babies instinctively and naturally will attach to a primary caregiver because that primary caregiver is going to allow them to survive, is going to equip them with the safety skills that they need, the people skills they need, the food, the shelter, etc. So attachment to a caregiver is something that is evolutionary, and we as humans have evolved to love and care for babies and vice versa. So that is all of the AO1 that you need to know for the biological approach, and this is your opportunity now to pause the video and identify some strengths or limitations of the biological approach. In 5 seconds I will go through the answers and we'll finish the video off with some peel paragraphs. So, strengths of the biological approach is the fact that it's scientific. And when we get to other approaches like the psychodynamic or the humanistic approach, they are not scientific, and psychology is a science. So we want to be able to identify cause and effect in behaviour. We want to be able to identify what chemicals in the brain lead to mental illnesses. So by the biological approach being scientific, that's very advantageous. And it gives credibility to the study of psychology because it means people respect the discipline, and it encourages more funding into psychology to, again, help with mental illness, develop treatments, etc. Which leads on to the next strength of practical applications, because biology and the impact of it on behaviour can lead to treatments and interventions such as drugs. Objective measurements through the use of brain scans. So this one's a good one to keep a note of, and then use your knowledge from biopsychology to add into that, because there's not necessarily any human error with brain scanning methods, so they're more objective with the machinery and the advancements in technology. However, the biological approach is massively deterministic, and by that it means that all behaviour has a cause, that our behaviour is caused or determined by physiological, genetic or evolutionary makeup, which suggests as humans we have no free will, no choice in how to behave. That's something the humanistic approach argues against massively, because they believe humans are active agents and shape their own lives through the choices that they make, whereas the biological approach says we're heavily influenced by hormones and genetics, etc. For that same reason, you can say they are reductionist, because they ignore potential other factors in explaining a person's behaviour, such as the role of the environment. And then lastly, the use of lab experiments and brain scans in those controlled environments means it lacks ecological validity. Their findings, their research lack that ecological validity to generalise outside of a controlled environment. So we're going to put these into peel structure now. So if you'd like to have a go at peel structure yourself, please pause the video, and in 5 seconds I'll talk you through my 3 peel paragraphs. So the first peel paragraph, the first point is that the biological approach is good because it's helped our understanding of human behaviour. Brain scanning methods have verified that Broca's area, located in the left frontal lobe of the brain where speech is produced, helps aid our understanding of those who might lose the ability to produce speech. So individuals that suffer strokes, knowing what side of the brain the stroke is on means that doctors can, adjust treatment accordingly, etc. And so by making use of scientific methods such as brain scans and lab experiments that follow standardised procedures, the biological approach can produce reliable results, meaning consistent results. Now, the consistency of these results can then make it be considered a useful and scientific and valid approach. There's a lot of key terms into that peel, and reflecting on it now, it's probably not the strongest peel paragraph. I would just strip it back a little bit in terms of it's useful because it's helped our understanding, given that example of brain scanning methods and Broca's area, and then explaining why that's useful, the relevance of scientific methods. And I would conclude with, therefore, it is a useful and scientific approach. So the second peel, it's useful, again, because it's helped our understanding of certain mental behaviours. Now notice here, we are using the word useful, but that's absolutely fine because we're giving a different use. It's helped our understanding of certain mental behaviours, such as OCD, and how OCD is linked to a lack of serotonin in the brain. The reason it becomes useful is because it's led to the development of treatments such as selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs, which are used to increase levels of serotonin in the brains of OCD sufferers and helps them live a better life. So it shows that understanding that the biological approach has given us enables psychology to improve people's lives. And then finally, one limitation of the biological approach is that it is deterministic, so it ignores the role of free will. That's what determinism means. So the biological approach sees all behaviour as a result of internal genetic causes over which we have no control. However, our genotype is expressed, the phenotype, is heavily influenced by the environment. And not even identical twins who share 100% of their DNA look, think and act the same. So the purely genetic explanation is problematic, especially when explaining things such as crime. For example, women who suffer with premenstrual tension, the fluctuation in hormones, etc. That can often be used as an excuse for aggressive or violent behaviour. And the same with criminals. It potentially provides them with an excuse for violent behaviours because they could blame it on their genetics or brain damage, etc., which means they're no longer in control of their behaviour. And whether that's ethical or not is a massive drawback if this biological approach, by pinpointing excuses for bad behaviours. This suggests that the biological view is too simplistic and it ignores crucial or important environmental factors. So that's how I would produce 3 peel paragraphs on the biological approach, and that concludes the end of this video. Thank you for watching. I hope you found it useful.